This is Kate McKinnon from Contemporary Geometric Beadwork. Today we're going to work on step 2 of our exploding podcast set, and this is really fun. Yesterday, in step 1, we made a ring of beads in one of 4 sizes, depending on what you chose. And then we square stitched 2 beads to each of the beads in the ring, doubling the count. In my case, I started with 22, and now I have 44. And then for a third round, we stepped up and we added increase beads of the same color, I'm using yellow and blue, on top of each 2 bead set. And between those, we placed a single spacer bead, mine is dark blue. And that helps hold architectural structure to the neat little moonlander tool we call the podcast bead. So now that we have this section, and if you don't, you should go back and watch the video for step 1. It's a little less than 10 minutes, and it shows you how to do the whole bead, which should take you somewhere between 15 minutes and an hour or so to do. If you've never done one before, you might have to figure it out. But we show every step, and you should check in with that video if you need to learn to make this. So once we have this, we're going to add Hexagon Increase to it, which is a 3-cycle increase. And this podcast bead here has all 3 rounds of the increase on it. And so you can see that it begins to look quite different. It is all elbows and knees, and it's going to begin to spread outward if we continue doing this. In fact, Nico Williams has done a piece that's ready for deconstruction. Will you? Look at that, right? And this piece here is very spread outward. His center ring was made of irregular beads, which are willing to squish together a little bit, so it's a little bit smaller. And then with the Hexagon Increase, the rickrack, and the spines that were built on top of this, it's spread out like a beautiful flower. So you can see already that our little podcast bead, which was so straight up and down, is already starting to take on a little bit of outward spread. It's beginning to show tendencies of growing into a cone. And you can see that if you are, diligent. It looks like a little volcano all of a sudden instead of a straight up and down. So the Hexagon Increase is a gradual increase, a 3-cycle increase, and this is 3 of them already on. I'm going to start from scratch in this video and complete this to 6 rounds, which is twice this much. 2 full cycles of the Hexagon Increase. We don't like to take off the wave section, which is what we call what we're building right now, until it has a minimum of 6 rounds of work. This is because if we take it off earlier than that, it won't be stable, and we'll lose all the benefit of having built it on the podcast bead. So to get started, I'm going to put a stop bead on an arm's length of thread, is all I ever work with. Work with as much as you're comfortable. And I'm leaving just enough tail to hold on to. This thread will be disappearing, getting cut off, just like in all of the other exploding sets. To get started with the wave section, once you have your stop bead on the end of your thread, just pass through one of the sticks, leaving the stop bead hanging down at the other end. If you go through it twice, you're unlikely to pull it out. The first round of the wave is a 2-bead increase, so it's much like the last round of the podcast bead. You put 2 beads at every increase tip, but here we have the benefit of being able to grow a little bit because we can use that blue bead in the middle, which could be thought of as a spacer, right? It's really the first round of our peyote stitch. So it's now a tooth that we can use to place 2 beads where before there was just 1 in between each increase stack. So this is what a full row, a full side actually, of this looks like. And tails are annoying. Well, I find them annoying. Some other people keep them forever. Tails are annoying, but can quickly be put to rest if you hang on to it. So this is what I'm doing here. 2 beads on top of every increase point, right? And then 2 side beads, which are peyote stitch, on the side of each blue spacer bead, which is now the first peyote bead in our fabric. If we left it alone and we never added to it, I think we'd probably call it a spacer, not a peyote bead, don't you? And so we're just going to do this on each side, each stick, each leg. In my case, I have 22 legs, so I'll do this move 22 times. 2 beads on top, and then 2 beads peyote stitched, and hold your thread back. You can see it's easier, right? 2 beads peyote stitched around each blue spacer. This goes pretty quickly once you understand the stitch, but of course each of these 3 rounds is different, so you need to pay attention to what round you're in. This one, very straightforward. The next one is also quite simple. Each round is nice in its own way. The next one splits this 2 bead increase with a single bead, and then the round after that is just simple peyote, 1 bead in every slot. And CGB calls that a fill round, as I mentioned. This right here is an increase round. If we were just continued this form and we put increases on every point, it would make a beautiful twisted waveform, and we call that an all wing, because increases on every point make each increase point grow with every round, and eventually they look like soaring wings. So this is what we would call the all wing stitch. Increase points on every tip and peyote fabric in between. I'm going to continue this stitch all the way around the edge of this piece, and I'll be right back with you. Now that I'm coming up on the last stitch of this round, I want to do something just as a safety precaution, which is to add a detonation point, a square stitched bead I can cut off. So this is really simple to do, and there are no hard and fast rules about this. I just want to leave a thread that I can cut off later. So I can do several different things. One of the things I like to do is leave a detonation point, a little bead I can cut, just as a square stitch in line in between peyote stitches. And that's what we call a detonation point. And then once we do that, we ignore it completely and just go ahead and complete the next peyote stitch in line. So if you do this at every round, at every bead pace, that's called the elegant guide round, and it's basically 2 rounds in one, and so much more. But if you do it in only one point like this and just tuck it away for later, that's what we call a detonation point, something that we can use to explode the beadwork off later. So while it looks like a little wart out there at this time, it's nothing to worry about. This first thread is disposable, and it's just going to be helpful when we need to remove the round. Here's the starting thread, here's the ending thread. With those 2 there, it's going to be enough to be able to deconstruct this if we have any trouble snipping, which we won't. Now, to continue on with this, the second round is 1 bead in every space, but on the tips, it's what's called a splitter, because this single bead splits the 2 round increase. So place single beads in between the 2 beads up top, and then single beads in a peyote stitch fashion here, peyote stitch through all of the gold beads on the side. So this will turn your stitch work from a sort of a loopy zigzag, a wavy zigzag, into a beautiful single line that will essentially end up to be just a line of peyote stitch. But the fact that these top beads here at the increase points have to go on in between the increases means that they don't go on as peyote stitch, so we can't call them that until the round is finished, when they sort of become de facto peyote. So splitters at the tips, single beads in every other space, and you'll end up with 1 new bead, 1 round 2 bead between every single bead of your first round. So just like this, splitter at the tip, single beads in between, and watch out for cross threads. Now we are in the real thread of the piece. The first round of thread will be removed when we deconstruct the set, but this now is the thread this is our real thread. It's very important that we not travel backward into the podcast section. Whenever you start a new section that you intend to remove, you need to never put this new thread through the old beads. So don't do any reinforcing. This isn't the time for that. Just stay in your round, and when it comes time to change threads, you need to have at least 2 rounds of work on so that you have something to weave into. So be sure when you start you have enough thread for 2 rounds. As I say, 1 meter is usually enough, but you can use what you like. So I'm going to go all the way around the piece and keep doing this. Splitter at the tip and peyote stitch on the sides. And I will be back with you when I've finished. And I'm coming up on the last stitch of this round now, And you see I'm just sort of passing by the deconstruction bead. It's not in the line that I'm sewing in. It's just sort of, it's just sort of bumped back here. And we may not need these at all. These are only a precaution if we have trouble cutting. So now our podcast is looking a bit different. We've got this pretty wave section going all the way around it with a single bead on each tip. And we're ready for the third round of the Hexagon Increase, which is just what we call a fill round, and it's straight peyote between every bead. So these corner tip beads now have been basically converted to regular peyote beads, and we can go ahead and just do regular peyote stitch around the whole round. And I'm going to use gold beads again for this. I'm going to make a striped wave section that has gold and purple. And so I'm going to continue around this podcast bead, placing a single bead in every slot, and I'll have a long running line of gold, just like I had a long running line of purple. So I'm going to place these extra beads, this gold round, and all the way around, one bead in every slot. And then I'll be back with you. I'm ready to finish the last two beads of this third round of Hexagon Increase now. The last two gold beads are going in. And now I'm just going to, now that I have a few rounds on, I'm going to pass through a couple of beads before I step up. This is just something that you'll see me do because I like to move my step up around. It's just a personal preference, but especially in exploding set, once in a while I like to do this. So you can just step straight up if you want, or you can do what I do and move your needle up just a few beads. So I started a new thread by weaving in a little bit and placed the first bead of the new round. And this is round 4 of the 6 rounds of the Hexagon Increase, and we're starting the increase cycle all over again. So this will be increases on each tip. And so between each of the two gold beads at the tip from round 3 of this wave section, I'm going to be placing the increase beads directly in front of the single purple bead that was in the other round. So the beads go in not on top of the previous increase bead or the previous splitter bead, but right in front of it. So don't worry if they don't look perfectly aligned when you begin putting them in. Just make sure that they sit directly between the two beads at the tip of your increase stack. And again, watch out for cross threads when you pull your thread tight. So peyote, ordinary peyote between the side beads, and 2 bead increases at each tip. And each increase add goes right between the 2 beads at the end from round 3 and directly in front of the splitter bead from round 2. And this is what it looks like. And you can see that the beadwork is starting to go out even more in a little curve around the edge. This is no longer a straight up and down form. This is a form that's starting to curl down. So I will continue beading around this round, placing 2 beads at every point and 1 bead as a peyote stitch along each side space. One of the reasons I don't use a 2-meter long thread to do this is because I'm doing a demonstration, and pulling that much thread through when you're working with the camera is a little bit difficult, but there certainly is nothing wrong with using a thread long enough to do the entire job. In fact, it might be preferable. So see how this goes? 2 beads at every tip, 1 bead in each side space, and now we have actually gone up to 5 beads per side, and so now my bead count is 5 times 22 for the edge, and here's how we're counting: 5 beads for the side. I'm coming up on the end of this round of the Hexagon Increase, the 2-bead increase of round 4 of the Hexagon Increase cycle here that we're calling the wave. I'm going to do a total of 6 rounds, and I'm here completing round 4. And I'm coming up onto the place where I added my new thread, and so I'm going to be mindful of that. I've already sort of woven in my tail. Whenever I have a chance, I try to weave in my tails a little bit, but I'm going to be mindful of this fact that I added a new thread here and do that thing I sometimes do of advancing my step up. So once you've stepped up, you can just pass through as many beads in the previous round as you want to make sure that you have a sturdy start. And the times to do that are times like this, when you've added a thread. So I'm going to cut this a little closer so it's out of my way, but I know where it is. And now I'm ready for round 5 of the Hexagon Increase, which is just the same as round 2. It's going to be a splitter. And so there'll be 1 bead in each side space. And when we come to the 2-bead increases at the top, we'll split them with a single bead. I'll use purple for this. And you already know how to do this because you did it in round 2, but I'll just remind you as we get to the top, and then I'll finish the round and come back. So between the 2-bead increase at the top, you put a single bead for what we call a splitter bead, and then continue on doing peyote stitch, placing 1 bead in every side slot. So now, after the end of the 5th round, we've got an even springier form. You can see that we're definitely starting to spill over like a waterfall. This is no longer straight up and down. This is definitely a little conical form now. And I'm going to go ahead and add the final round, which is the simplest thing in the world, right? Oh, pardon me. It's just straight peyote. And so we call this a fill round. And it's just 1 bead in each slot. And as soon as I finish this round, then I'm done with the wave section, and I'm ready to move on to the rickrack, which is very, very simple, and we'll do the rickrack for 12 rounds. So each section takes a little longer to complete, right? Because there are more beads. But things get quite straightforward. Once you have the structure in like this, it's really easy to see what to do next. And so this is the structure of the final round of the wave. 1 bead in every slot. I'm going to go around and do this, and then I'll be back to show you what it looks like after I've finished this round. Well, that's it. I finished my last gold bead. The 6th round is complete. And I've just tucked my thread in by weaving it through the edge beads. Be sure when you're reinforcing or weaving your thread in that you don't pass back through a previous section. We don't want any thread from the wave section to enter the podcast. And tomorrow, when we put a rickrack bangle on this, we won't want any thread from the rickrack to enter this wave section. So keep your thread in your section. And look at this lovely energy in this form. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow to show you how to add a rickrack bangle that will fit you to this podcast. Thank you. Bye-bye.